Before he was even known as Rosey Brown, the great titan of the gridiron in New York City, Roosevelt Brown honed his skills in the rural town of Charlottesville, Virginia in the 1940s.
We always called him Sonny, S-O-N-N-Y, because he had such a great disposition. And when he went to the Giants, they changed it to Rosey. He's big and tall for his age. And he got used to being bigger and taller than everybody, but not ungainly. He was always graceful.
He was always the biggest guy in his class, from when he was a little kid to when he became a giant.
During the height of the racial divide in America, Rosey would attend Jefferson High School, the city's only African-American high school.
This was back in the days of segregation. Charlottesville was a typical Southern town. It was difficult at times for all of us, for Rosey, for me, and unfortunately, that's the way things were at that time.
Forbidden by his father to play football at first, Rosey decided to join the high school band instead. But it wouldn't take long for the towering trombone player to catch the eye of the football team.
Roosevelt was spotted as a sophomore, and the high school football coach said, "Who the hell is that kid over there?" And someone said, "Oh, he's on the band." He goes, "Well, he's going to be a football player now."
Coach Smith, who was the coach of the Jefferson Red Devils, decided a boy with arms that long and that tall ought to try football instead of trombone.
After some persuasion from Coach Smith, Rosey's parents gave him permission to play football, but he would have to juggle both of his responsibilities.
He had to go to band practice, and he was blowing his boop, 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 and he had half his uniform on, and the other half was in the locker. He would run to the football field, put his top on, get his helmet, and start practicing for his football.
He loved playing football, always did, because he was so big and tall, and he liked just throwing his weight around, and everybody was going to the park, Washington Park, and the people sat on the hillside to see Rosey, the star of the team.
After excelling on the football field for Jefferson High, Rosey took his talents up the road to Baltimore, Maryland, attending Morgan State University. Playing under legendary coach Eddie Hurt, Brown would develop into one of the best linemen in the country and was a key contributor on some ferocious Morgan squads in the early 50s. At 6'3", 255 pounds, Rosey's combination of agility and quickness would help him blossom. And in 1952, he was voted as a small college All-American. But when it came time for the NFL draft, he was still relatively unknown to pro scouts. Luckily for the Giants, an obscure publication would circulate through the front office, spreading the news of Brown's superlatives.
The Pittsburgh Courier, which was an African-American newspaper in western Pennsylvania, and they had a black All-American team because Roosevelt Brown played at an all-black college. And someone said, this guy's on the All-American team, maybe we should give him a look.
So with the 322nd pick in the 27th round of the 1953 NFL Draft, New York selected Roosevelt Brown, the greatest sleeper pick in league history.
He would practice against the Andy Robustellis, the Dick Moduleskis, the Rosie Greers. These were all great players, and every day he would go against them. So he developed his skills, which he really didn't have when he was at Morgan State. He came in and he was just this unbelievable specimen who learned to play the game when he got up to the Giants because of all these great players he practiced against.
In 1953, at only 20 years of age, Roosevelt Brown became one of the first players ever drafted by the NFL from a historically black college. He would join New York star defensive back Emlen Tunnell as one of the first African Americans to ever suit up for Big Blue. But with segregation still a harsh reality in the U.S., the young Giants would have to persevere through challenging times.
Rosey Brown used to tell me stories about, when they used to go on the road. A lot of the hotels would not let African Americans in there, and my dad had to kind of step up and say, well, then you're not letting any of us in because we're not staying.
So Wells said, if you don't want them, you don't want us. Rosey said he turned back around, got back on the plane, and came back to New Jersey. And Rosey said that all the players were like, wow. Wells was a good man. You guys don't know. He was a fantastic person.
As a rookie in 1953, Rosey would also benefit from the tutelage of another Giants legend, longtime head coach Steve Owen. As a former offensive lineman himself, Owen took Brown under his wing, mentoring the young tackle.
Steve Owen talked with him, showed him how to block, showed him what to do, talked about rules and regulations.
In Owen's final season as head coach, he helped Rosey catch on quick to the pro game, and soon Brown's versatility would be utilized on all sides of the ball.
He got a lot of renown for being he was actually a three-way player. You know, at the time there wasn't anything known as special teams, but they called it the third platoon because it wasn't really specialized yet, and he used to play on the kickoff coverage, and he would be like the first guy down the field busting the wedge, making tackles, and he was, you know, a physical freak where he was 270, 275 pounds, and he had these broad shoulders, but he only had a 29-inch waist. So he had a lot of maneuverability, he was athletic, he was agile, and he was fast.
After finishing with a losing record in Brown's rookie season, the Giants would make a change in 1954, and Jim Lee Howell took over as the new head coach. With Vince Lombardi as his offensive coordinator, the Giants would start to assemble a star-studded offense that featured the veteran gunslinger Charlie Connerly and New York's leading man, running back Frank Gifford. Rosey began to revolutionize the offensive tackle position, protecting and paving the way for his teammates day in and day out.
You know, Vince Lombardi used him as a pulling tackle, which was unheard of in the 1950s, and he would lead, you know, Frank Gifford on sweeps and when he would run the option play. You know, Frank Gifford actually said he wouldn't have never made it to the Hall of Fame without Roosevelt Brown, because he would open the hole, Gifford would run through the hole, Roosevelt Brown would take a guy out, and then he'd be running downfield, Roosevelt Brown would pass him, and he'd take someone else out like 40 yards downfield, which is not bad for a left tackle.
Chuck Connolly at quarterback. Gifford going wide to his left. With a nice block by Rosey Brown, Frank makes it a 5-yard gain.
Rosey Brown was huge. He was 6'5", weighed about 260, 70 pounds. Probably the best offensive lineman, maybe the best ever. And I wouldn't want to have a foot race with him. He was really fast and very athletic. I mean, he could have played any position. Could have played halfback probably too. He was extraordinary and a wonderful, wonderful person.
In 1956, Rosey Brown and his Giants teammates moved into their new home, Yankee Stadium.
New York had all of a sudden awakened to the fact that there was a professional football team. And it wasn't just the Yankees, it wasn't just DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle. All of a sudden we were selling out Yankee Stadium, and it became a real boost. I mean, it just grew up overnight.
The Giants would have a dominant season, and Rosey Brown was named Lineman of the Year. New York returned to the NFL championship game for the first time in a decade, facing off against the Chicago Bears in front of a sellout crowd at Yankee Stadium. With Rosey manning the line, the Giants' offense would have a field day, erupting for 47 points against the Bears.
We had a magical season and wound up beating the Chicago Bears for the NFL championship 47-7. As far as I'm concerned, that was when not only the Giants arrived, that was when pro football arrived.
The New York Giants win professional football's biggest prize, the World Championship.
Fittingly, Rosey would be the one to carry his coach Jim Lee Howell off the field in triumphant glory following the victory.
When they made it to that finish line, you could just see how much they loved each other. You know, you have these titans, these guys who were just gladiators at the time. It was a sense of pride.
With football on the rise in America, Rosey and the Giants were in the midst of their own golden era, and they returned to the NFL championship game in 1958, where they hosted Johnny Unitas and the Baltimore Colts.
At the tackles, All-League Rosey Brown discusses strategy with running mate Jack Stroud.
For the first time ever, the title match was televised across the country in what would become known as the greatest game ever played.
Giants up there at the line of scrimmage. The flip goes to Gifford, wide to the left, and he gets yardage. He's at the 35, the 40, he's at the 50, the Baltimore 40. He's down at about the 31-yard line.
Key player in that was left tackle Roosevelt Brown, Hall of Famer, and who could outrun me and weighed about 250 pounds. And I think he made 2 key blocks on the same play.
Circled his own left end, cut back, and goes all the way down to the Baltimore 31-yard line.
Keep your eyes on Gifford at left half. With a nice block by Rosey Brown, he slides out for Connolly's pass. Drives through Davis for a touchdown. And the amazing Giants take the lead.
It was a crazy, crazy day. They didn't win it so much as we lost it.
And Amici rockets for the touchdown. The Colts win 23-17 as Bedlam breaks loose. Goalpost totter as Yankee Stadium, football capital of the year, closes down a glorious Giants season and the greatest game ever played.
Despite losing the overtime thriller, the popularity of football spread across the nation. Roosevelt Brown and his teammates became a smash hit in New York, and the advertising world would hone in on Rosey's celebrity, featuring the well-dressed Giant in numerous magazine ads.
I have those pictures. He's sitting up there like this. But he was doing the commercials for the Marlboro Cigarette Company. At the time when Sports Illustrated did this, they wanted to get the pro football players who were the guys protecting the team, and they were so tough and so big at the time, they would call them violent faces of the pro football. You run into them, you're gonna go down like a train wreck. Like he says, to become a Hall of Famer, put the icing on his cake, but this was like the cream of the cream for him also.
From 1955 to 1960, Rosey Brown was named to 6 straight Pro Bowls. To this day, he's still considered the best left tackle to ever play in the National Football League.
He was the biggest, the strongest, and the fastest at his position, and that's what made him great.
As you know, the Giants were revealing the top 100 players in the history of the franchise. Let's go to the man who was voted number 2, Roosevelt Brown. Maybe the best left tackle in the history of the sport, but an absolute dominant player.
How many offensive linemen would be like number 2? This is a left tackle who went to a small black school, Morgan State.
For our younger fans, now when we did the great plays and fans could vote on it, there's the one play where he blocks like 3 guys at once as one of the top plays in the history of the Giants. As the decade of the 1960s rolled on, Roosevelt Brown forged ahead as the veteran mainstay for Big Blue, shoring up the offensive line.
The Giants wrap this game up with a long-distance run. Joe Morrison takes off. Dess and Brown give him added blocks, and Joe never stops. 70 yards he goes, and New York wins over Philadelphia 37-14.
In a 1962 game against the Washington Redskins, Rosey's protection was so good that it enabled Giants quarterback Y.A. Tittle to throw a record-setting 7 touchdowns.
The all-time record. It's a perfect pitch to Gifford, who speeds 37 yards for the score.
You know, my recollection of Rosey first starts in about 1963. I was at training camp, I was a young kid, and walking through the locker room in the practice field, he was a behemoth of a man. You just noticed him right away because he was the biggest guy on the team. And what I think Rosey excelled at was not only was he a size speed guy, but he had a lot of God-given talent, and he used it. He was just a tremendous athlete.
With Rosey paving the way, the Giants would make it back to 3 straight NFL championship games from 1961 to 1963. In his 13 seasons with Big Blue, Roosevelt Brown was a true Ironman, missing only 4 games in his entire career.
He was just a reliable guy, you know, and his legacy was, for 13 years, a really durable player.
Following the 1965 season, a blood clot condition would cause Rosey to announce his retirement from the Giants. But his next chapter with Big Blue was just beginning.
Back then, you know, if you played for the Giants and you were a player like him, you gave it his all, You pretty much had a job for life, and that's what Rosey did. You know, Rosey, he went from 1965 after a bunch of injuries, went in to be an offensive line coach.
To assistant coach Rosey Brown, it offers the satisfaction of a job well done.
He was an assistant coach for a number of years under Allie Sherman. He was coaching the linemen, and then he ended up becoming a Giants full-time scout where he would go to small colleges like where he came from, and he's credited as finding John Mendenhall and bringing John Mendenhall to the Giants, who was a very good defensive player for a long time in the 70s.
Lawrence Taylor, he brought them. Carl Banks, he brought on. Tiki Barber, he brought on. And he enjoyed the work. He enjoyed visiting the colleges to look for new talent.
Rosey was, you know, as big and intimidating a guy he really had a big heart. He was a very soft-spoken guy. I traveled with him for a week back in 1979 down south, and everywhere we went, we'd go out to practice, and all the coaches knew who he was, and they had a real fond respect for him. And it was so easy going into those schools and walking around with Rosey because, you know, he was a legend. And his specialty as a scout was offensive lineman and defensive lineman. And he would just talk about a guy's toughness, and that's all he wanted. He wanted a guy who was tough, and if he didn't like him, he would just shake his head and say, he's no New York Giant.
In 1975, Rosey would be honored with his crowning achievement when he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Ladies and gentlemen, Roosevelt Brown.
Rosey would experience another life milestone in 1992 when he married his wife, Linda Anglin.
He said, come on, honey, let's walk in here like we're queen and king. I said, we are king and queen. He was a big teddy bear. He was a good person, he really was, and he treated me like a queen.
As a player, coach, and scout, Rosey's career with Big Blue spanned over 50 years. He was the true embodiment of what being a Giant is all about.
Rosey was there for every birth of the Mara's children. Ann and Wellington Mara, he was there for every birth. The Giants was like his second family.
Roosevelt Brown passed away in 2004 at the age of 71, just 1 year before his boss and lifelong friend, Wellington Mara.
Him and Wells was like this. Him and Wells was like this. Someone wrote an article with the two of them standing side by side. Rosey had his hat on and Wells had his hat on. The title was Two Giants of the New York Giants.
6 years later, his wife Linda would be in attendance at MetLife Stadium as the organization paid tribute to Rosey, inducting him into the inaugural Giants Ring of Honor.
This offensive tackle was named to the Pro Bowl 9 times, Lineman of the Year in 1956, Hall of Famer Rosey Brown. Representing Rosey, his wife Linda Brown.
Rosey's hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia, has also paid tribute to their local hero, building a plaque in the center of town and renaming a street in his honor.
He was the one who brought most of the fame and glory to Charlottesville. So it's really gratifying. Once a Giant, always a Giant. It meant everything to him.